As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road, lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up, fall down.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to the universe and the world. And I mention the world and the universe because the health is wealth, the health of the climate, the health of the people, the health of civilization is something that has always been an issue and a concern, I think, through written history. But definitely today, on this day of August 24th, and given the COVID crisis, I think all of our antennae have been kind of stimulated about what does it mean to be sane and not to feel under duress and not to feel quarantined and not to feel imprisoned. I say all that to say that the show we have today focusing on mental health, we could have had Dr. Crystal on a year ago, 5 years ago. And looking at your bio, Dr. John Crystal, we could have had you on 20 years ago and you still were acclaimed back then. But I mentioned that just to say that this is really an important show in terms of mental health, the COVID issue, the role of the community in general, but specifically in terms of the Yale Cultural Ambassadors, the role of the Yale Clinical Center for Investigation. So without further ado, Dr. John Crystal is here with us. He's the Professor of Translational Research and Professor of Psychiatry and of Neuroscience at Yale University. Does that mean you received 5 salaries, Dr. Crystal?
As many as I can.
As many as you can, all right. He's also co-director of the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, and a big shout out to YCCI and the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation. It might not be something that's on the tip of the tongue of most people, but thanks to the Yale Cultural Ambassadors and Tisha Johnson, we've been able to kind of talk about really the richness of intellectual capital here in the New Haven area. And it's a worldwide intellectual capital. And it's not in terms of just exploitive, predatory capitalism, but it's really a community sharing capitalism. And that's why I'm really so glad to kind of do this show. Dr. Crystal is also chair of the Department of Psychiatry and chief of psychiatry at Yale New Haven Hospital. Another salary bonus, I suppose, for you, Dr. Crystal. And director of the NIAAA Center for Translational Neuroscience of Alcoholism, director of Clinical Neuroscience Division, VA National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Syndrome. Dr. Crystal, I was looking at your background and I have 8 pages here in front of me. So I'm not going to go through all 8 pages, but I am going to kind of guess we're going to delve right in terms of mental health, the COVID crisis. People are reluctant, even, 10 years, in terms of your history, people are reluctant to even pursue mental health services, and perhaps now it's even more needed. Service delivery, access, and also the role of the cultural ambassadors from a community standpoint, from just reaching out to every sector of society to realize that in some ways, and Dr. Crystal, you can correct me, in some ways we all might be partially crazy. We all might, and what we can do to balance out our craziness with our sanity each day is certain that balancing act and kind of the tightrope we all go through. So further ado, Dr. Crystal, welcome. I just wonder whether you'd like to make the opening statements in terms of, and set us on the right course in terms of mental health, your role, access to services, and just the overall importance of it. This is just so key at this point in time.
Sure. Thanks so much. And thank you very much for the opportunity to participate with my friends, the cultural ambassadors, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, on this call. We're all in this together. This has been one of the most extraordinary times that we've ever seen. Life is hard enough without COVID, without all the challenges that we face in our society, and you add COVID on top of that, and for some people, it tips them over the edge in terms of feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, feeling isolated, feeling worried, having difficulty sleeping, having difficulty relaxing, being irritable and edgy. All of these problems, you know, that people have been experiencing during COVID, and oftentimes because people are so immersed in just getting by in day by day, they don't think about these kinds of problems as being tied into the stress, you know, the stress that they're going through, and they don't think about themselves as needing help. Sometimes some people will need help to manage these kinds of problems.
And so, what do we do today if someone's listening? And again, we have about 48 minutes to really unpack and
Sure.
go through a variety of themes. But sometimes people are reluctant. What can we do to encourage folks to seek out help, to call the mental health center, to call? What do you think we can do as a kind of a exercise in your discipline of healing? Sure.
So I would say the first step is realizing that you got a problem. As I say, people are so absorbed in their lives every day and in just getting through the day, they often don't take stock. You know, everybody these days is taking their temperature, but they're not taking their mental health temperature. They're not really getting a sense of really how stressed they are. And so they see the symptoms. Maybe they're drinking more alcohol. Maybe they're having more arguments. So they see the symptoms of the stress, but they don't connect it to the stress. Some people, you know, still put a stigma on dealing with these kinds of problems. And I'd really like this is one of the topics I'd really like us to talk about today. And,
for sure.
Because, you know, there's a misunderstanding about the symptoms of stress. In other words, if you stress your knee and you twist your knee and you go to the doctor to get that fixed, that's perfectly okay. But if you stress your emotions, somehow people view that differently if you go to get help with that. And I think that's one of the challenges we face. The people willing to get help for the kinds of emotional challenges they face in their lives.
So let's give a plug for the, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're affiliated with the Connecticut Mental Health Center.
Yes.
And what is your specific title there?
I don't have a specific title at the Mental Health Center, but the Mental Health Center is, the Department of Psychiatry provides services to the Mental Health Center. Yeah. So in a way, I oversee, in my role as chair, work done at the Connecticut Mental Health Center.
So they're open for people for a call.
Yes. So there are a number of places that people can go for help around the New Haven area that are available to provide support. The Connecticut Mental Health Center is one. Another one is the Cornell Scott Hill Health Center, which has a mental health clinic. There's a behavioral health clinic at Yale New Haven Hospital on the St. Ficklin campus. And actually there in other surrounding communities, there are other clinics and support centers available as well.
Just as you were talking, Dr. Crystal, would you include Clifford Beers also in that?
Sure, absolutely. And you know, one of the things about Clifford Beers and the Yale Child Studies Center is that everybody in the family is stressed. So sometimes it's the children who are experiencing a lot of stress. Nowadays, there's a fair amount of anxiety about kids getting ready to go back to school and what that might be like. The impact of the disruption of not being in school on keeping up with the schoolwork, and some people thinking about applying to colleges. There's a lot of stress out there and a lot of uncertainty.
Absolutely. Reverend Perry, wondered if you would like to jump in at this point, just to put some additional context on our discussion and the role of the cultural ambassadors, because as Dr. Crystal mentioned, this is a community team effort. To win this ball game, you know, it's to win this series of psychic salvation. We're going to all have to be on the playing field, and you know, we may be in the first maybe a leadoff hitter. Some of us might be batting cleanup, but we gotta be all gotta be on the field and playing together.
Yes, Tom, I think that having centers that are open for people who may be suffering from mental illness or depression, that's one part. Getting people to those centers, the essential part. And I think getting them to be more concerned or to take charge of their health is what the ambassadors are really trying to work toward. You know, mental illness has always been a stigma in the Black community. And no one wants to admit to the fact that there may be something wrong with them. So how do we get to work with people to let them know that, you know, there are options that can really help them? Dr. Crystal mentioned alcoholism and maybe drugs and other things. And I think that these are just, sometimes people treat one thing when they probably should be treating something else. And so when we look at in religion and the cultural ambassadors, we look at these as an outward symbol of something else going wrong. Like if a person is on alcohol, why is that person on? What's driving that person to that? What are the stress factors, and how can we meet them at a place where we can reach them to get the help that they need? And I think that Reverend Clayton had mentioned that in his church, he had some individuals who were struggling with mental health issues. And so he did outreach to John Crystal and to Yale to see in what ways could Yale specifically help individuals who may not readily want to go to one of these centers. What ways could we attract them? What ways could we reach out to them? And I think that that's the crux of where we are in this discussion.
Reverend Clayton, please jump in and elaborate, if you would, on that, because that's really a perfect example in my mind, given regardless of your church denomination, how ministers in particular in our church and mosque and synagogue infrastructure can really be transmission sites, if you will, or information sites, conduits for putting people on the healthy road. Just wonder whether you want to elaborate on the example that Reverend Perry just illustrated.
I think he's muted.
Reverend Clayton, unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Dr. Crystal, for taking time to share with us today. In our local church, we noticed that people were stressing over various areas of life. And we have what we call an advocacy program, where those whose life work is social work would at least allow those persons to talk to them, and then we would direct them to the right source. And nowadays, especially during COVID, there is a serious strain on individuals. Unemployment, and unemployment equals lack of everything else. If you can't pay your mortgage, if you can't pay your rent, even with the area where government has subsidized or give some help, there is still stress there. And just by people being home who are normally not home. I mean, I've never been a person to stay home. And when we find ourselves inside the four walls, so to speak, it seems like the walls are coming in on you.
Yes.
And the stress of sickness and death. And I'm not sure if you know that as pastors, we are hands-on people. We like to visit, we like to touch, we like to feel, we like to communicate face to face. And during this pandemic, that was not possible. You can't visit the hospitals, you can't during funerals, you can't meet with the family prior to, everything have to be Zoom. And so that brought about an additional stress. And so in our community, as Dr. Perry was saying a little bit earlier, that we don't want anyone to know that we need this help. But programs like this and what Dr. Crystal has been telling us, we're trying to make people aware that there's no reason to be ashamed.
Yes.
I thought about this morning about my knee. I had trouble with my knee. I thought I had something really wrong with the knee. And Dr. Crystal talked about if you got a problem with your knee. And I went to the doctor. I said, listen, man, what's with this knee? I need a MRI or something. And so he sent me to get an MRI. He said, there's nothing wrong with the knee. He said, just exercise a little bit. In a month or two, it'll be better. And it worked. Excellent. But if that was a mental problem, would I have gone and sought the help?
Yes.
If we have a toothache, we go. If we have heart trouble, we go. We have to make people comfortable in knowing that it's okay if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling different, if you're short-tempered. Maybe there's something going on that you can get help for before it goes in an area that is not good.
Indeed.
Can I say this, Tom?
Please.
One of the things, because we're so caught up with the flu vaccine and COVID, we don't really have enough ambassadors or enough people out there being ambassadors to deal with this particular issue. But I'm hopeful that we can start a campaign. And I was just looking at the young man who just got shot because he had a knife. He had mental illness issues. He was going into a store. He was shot by police. And it's not the first time. And that's why what the Black Lives Matter is trying to address is that we need people who can talk to people who are having these mental issues without shooting them because they just don't understand what's going on, or they do not have another means of reaching out. One of the ways I think that we might be able to do this, Tom, is to have a show on mental illness with people who may be struggling with mental illness. Secondly, I think that we might be able to develop a program we call Loved Ones Helping Loved Ones. Loved Ones Helping Loved Ones. So if you know that your loved one needs some help, that you may be able to reach out to us or to somebody so that we can talk to them or we can direct them, because they trust us, to an agency or to a person or persons who might be able to help them. You know, I would feel remiss if I had mental problems and I just went to the Connecticut Mental Health. First of all, I don't like the name. The name suggests that I got a mental health problem, and it already stigmatizes me. So, you know, but if I had some other way, and if someone could direct me without going in that direct route, because it looks like I'm taken to the hospital because I'm crazy, and I may be, but we all may be, as you said earlier. Indeed. But it depends on the degree and how we approach it, how we approach people with it. Yale did we had a health fair in Waterbury some years ago, and Yale brought a team of people up with their computers, and people were able to go over to the table and go through all of the clinical trials that may affect them. It was amazing that there were 3 or 4 people from the church who signed up for mental health, who probably would have never admitted that to anyone, that they needed this. So, I mean, we just got to find a way or ways of how we might be able to address this in a socially acceptable way in our society. Indeed.
Dr. Crystal, based on what you've kind of heard, the cogent thoughts of Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry, any response or elaboration that you'd like to share?
Sure. So a couple of thoughts. The first is that we've been trying for a long time to figure out how to do our work a little bit differently so that it would be more welcoming to people coming in from our surrounding community. I'll give you some examples. So one of the programs is a program that we call street psychiatry. where we're not waiting for people coming to us, but there's actually, it's both a clinical program and a research program where we're going out into the community, onto the green, on other places, and finding people who seem to be struggling and trying to reach out to them and help them out that way. Another program, which is a kind of a parallel of what Reverend Perry talked about, and this is going on at the Connecticut Mental Health Center, is what we call peer support. So these are peer support are when people who have gone through the same struggles and come out the other side, they take that experience and they can provide some support and guidance to people who are going through some of those same kinds of problems. And the Connecticut Mental Health Center has a peer support program. Another project that I know Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry know about, which is a research study that is working with YCCI, the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, is a program that's led by Dr. Ayanna Jordan, which is trying to take down the barrier between the churches and the Connecticut Mental Health Center, and where we're working together to help get people connected for treatment. So we're trying to do business differently than we did in the past, and to make our clinics a little less imposing, or make them seem more accessible than maybe they have in the past.
Excellent. Tisha, I see you're taking notes. I think that means you want to share some cogent comments with us. We have Tisha Johnson here, and you're kind of the one that's brought all these rabble-rousers together, including myself. So I want to give you a shout out and a chance to maybe share a few comments if you'd like.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to turn my camera off if you watch me take notes and call on me. But I'm just joking, excuse me. So, I think that the points that John raised are, and Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, are really important. One of the things that we actually had planned to start prior to COVID was an actual partner campaign with the ambassadors to focus on addressing issues of stigma and making sure that, the community understood not only the importance of seeking mental health services if needed, but also the integration and the cross-section that we work very hard on as ambassadors with research. And so I think that those are really important points that we still plan to take on after COVID. And I think, as John mentioned, this conversation around research, I think it's also just important to mention to the listeners that we had the show with Madeline Baranowski and Linda Coleman to talk about the protections that are in place for clinical research. But just so you know, mental health research is a special category with additional considerations, additional protections in the IRB process to make sure that whatever is being done, that there's a process to protect individuals who have any mental impairment, so that in no way are they being taken advantage of. And I think that that's a really important point. And I think those are some of the additional points that we wanted to work on as ambassadors, to make sure that the community is aware not only of the importance of access of care and trying to break down some of the barriers and stigma around it, but also to address some of the really important research that we're doing in this space.
Indeed, really well said. Let's move a little bit to research. And what I really am excited about in doing these shows is that we don't have to talk down to people. I mean, so folks are, in my mind, just hungry for information. And even if we use a word that they may not be totally familiar with, I'm comfortable that they will kind of look it up. We'll kind of explain it. But Dr. Crystal, what I'm trying to say is, in terms of neuroscience, if you give us a few words on that, because people might be hearing that term and hearing that maybe at some point our brains might be connected to computers. They may hear this word artificial intelligence and not know what it means. But you've been involved with something that's really critical from my standpoint, not only from a research standpoint, but from where society is going in terms of what does it mean to be human. So maybe share a little bit about your passion for neuroscience and your work, and maybe even tease us a little bit with some of the research that you're involved with.
Sure. Well, so when people say research, I think they think that's a scary word because of the images that you described. But for me, I got into research because it seemed to me that we had so many questions that we couldn't answer. That people want to know, how come I have this problem, and what's the right treatment for me, and all kinds of questions that actually are right at the limit or beyond of what our current knowledge has. So on the upside, we have treatments like psychotherapy and counseling, and we have medications, and those can help many people. But on the downside, even with our best treatments, there are many people who we can't help, and that's really what we're trying to do research on, because we realize that if we want to have a better treatment for anxiety or insomnia or depression, we need to know something about the brain, because the brain is the organ that generates insomnia, anxiety, and depression. And the thing is that over the past 10 to 15 years, the technologies for studying the brain have advanced incredibly. And so we have new ways of studying the brain. I'll just tell you one story. It's not too technical. So, the brain is a little bit like a computer, and it's the circuits kind of come together. And when the circuits are functioning normally, generally people are okay. And we discovered just a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that people who have very severe and persistent forms of depression, and some with post-traumatic stress disorder, will have lose some of those connections in the circuits involved in the regulation of emotion. And you might think, well, that's pretty discouraging, that there's a change in brain structure with some of these disorders. But the brain is one of the most plastic organs, dynamic organs. It's always removing and adding new connections. And some of the treatments that we have for depression now, some new treatments, one that just got approved by the Food and Drug Administration called esketamine, can grow back some of these connections very rapidly. So we're used to thinking about an intervention like psychotherapy as something that makes us feel good, but psychotherapy also is affecting the pattern of connections in the brain. And so
say that again. Say that differently.
Okay. So when people go to counseling and they get support, we're used to thinking about that as something that works purely at the level of behavior. But even something like counseling and support, our brains are social organs. The activity of our brains changes when we're engaged in social behavior, and circuits are activated during psychotherapy. And you can show, as we showed in a recent paper, that different kinds of psychotherapy worked on different circuits of the brain to help to alleviate anxiety in different ways. So we think of emotional problems as purely a problem of experience, but some of these emotional problems are also changes in brain circuitry and brain function. And that's one of the reasons that sometimes when people have persisting symptoms of anxiety or depression, we're using medications like antidepressant medications to help to alleviate these symptoms.
I really appreciate your giving those examples, Dr. Crystal. I was mentioning to Reverend Clayton before we went live, so to speak, that literally this show on Mondays has become therapy for me. That it's at least for those 48 minutes, I can act reasonably optimistic about things, and who knows? Call me at 11:05, and we'll see how things are going. But I definitely have mentioned that to him. Your Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry, before I ask you to kind of weigh in, and Sunday, if you have any comments, Dr. Crystal, you're involved with it. You edit a magazine,
yes,
a journal.
yes.
Share with us some of the, because regardless of people, whether we have remote learning or in-school learning, as I think you've indicated, and the brain perceives it to be it's a lifelong activity. Your brain is alive even when you're sleeping. So it's a 24/7, 365 endeavor. But share, if you would, some of the articles that you think are really, tease us with some of the articles in the journal and to be editor of that journal, that's also a very prestigious position. But I was just curious to kind of.
Sure. So this when you introduced me, used a phrase that I'll amplify, which is called translational neuroscience, and the journal that I edit is called Biological Psychiatry. In fact,
there we go.
My biological psychiatry mug. And what biological psychiatry is an attempt to link the most basic brain mechanisms that you could study only in animals under the most kind of careful and rigorous ways that we couldn't possibly study in people, and to link those to the kinds of research and things we can do with people to try to build an understanding of how the brain works to regulate the kinds of symptoms that we're talking about: anxiety, fear, depression. For some people will have other kinds of symptoms like hearing voices or having false beliefs, compulsive behaviors, things like that. And so this the journal in the past few years has made real progress, published papers that have made real progress in helping us to understand what brain circuits are involved in which kinds of behaviors and symptoms. And what we've come to realize is that if we really want to study the brain, we have to, we have to have an understanding that takes us to an understanding of what individual nerve cells are doing, both in their activity and in their chemistry. And when we understand that, then we can kind of, you might say, build a story about how the brain functions normally and how it goes awry when people are suffering from symptoms. And it's those kinds of insights that help to drive better treatments. And there are, emerging new treatments that are coming out of that process. I mentioned one there, but there are a number of them.
Tremendous. Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry and Sunday, if you like, and Tisha as well, as we have roughly another 10, 15 minutes. Any comments on what we've heard? And again, with COVID, the crisis, just the state of civilization, the cultural ambassadors, how do we stay sane in this process? And just how do we reach out and love one another and connect with one another? Any comments as we kind of, we're kind of like in the seventh inning? Reverend Perry, would like to go first?
No, I'm going to yield to Sunday first, since she did.
Okay, Sunday.
Well, I want to thank you for that, Reverend Perry. I guess the only comments that I have, obviously, anytime we can do research and advance our medical is always a great opportunity. I will say what caught my attention was going out to the streets and meeting the people where they are. I think Reverend Perry or Reverend Clayton said when I came on the line, a lot of people look at mental illness as a stigma. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to tell people. But I think I heard a doctor say that that you have a program where you go out in the street and that's like meeting people where they are and allowing people to come. I know that Yale does a lot of different things in the community where they do go out in a van and they do different things that they're helping the community. But I did not know about this one. And I think that's a great opportunity for folks who won't normally go to the doctors, if there's a van or a truck out there, they may be more apt to just stop by and have some conversation. So I appreciate that. And then I think you talked also a little bit about peer-to-peer support.
Mhm.
And even in the corporate world, we know that is a big advantage when you have someone that can relate to what you're going through and really provide you in this COVID time and even beyond COVID that are important for many people to ensure that they're getting the help that they need. So
Excellent.
again, thank you, Reverend Perry.
Yes, I'd like to say one thing. I'd like to ask John Crystal,
Yeah.
Dr. Crystal, the question in terms of people who are institutionalized. At one time, there were those doors where you could take a person who was ill and you could commit them for a while for evaluation or treatment. It seems like that funding ended and all mayhem broke loose in a way. Is there any, has the legislation or the funding changed for that?
So you make an important point, which is that I would say beginning around the 1960s, the people who are longstanding residents of Connecticut may remember that there used to be a big state hospital in Norwich, Connecticut. There used to be a big hospital called Fairfield Hills Hospital in sort of Southwest Connecticut. There were a number of these large state hospitals, and the only large state hospital left in Connecticut is called the Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown, Connecticut. Oh. And that's because there has been a gradual reduction in the number of psychiatry hospital beds, particularly state or public hospital beds, that has been a progressive reduction really since the 1960s around our country. The good news about that reduction is that a lot of it reflects the fact that in the 1960s we really didn't have any effective treatments for problems like hearing voices or having false beliefs, symptoms of a disorder that I'll call schizophrenia, where these symptoms are common. But many people would say that the reduction in hospital beds went faster than the development of support services in the communities, and that left many people homeless and disconnected from treatment. And what we've been trying to do since the 70s, say, the Connecticut Mental Health Center opened in 1966. We now have community mental health centers in Bridgeport and in New Haven and in Hartford, where at a community level, we're trying to provide in mostly for outpatients services for people, particularly with chronic mental illness. Bridgeport and New Haven do have some inpatient beds and are providing some of the treatment that might have previously taken place in the large hospitals. But nowadays, most treatment is outside of the hospital, and a minority of the treatment is in the hospital. In fact, there are a lot of protections, the court, for example, that prevent hospitals from holding people too long in the hospital. And oftentimes the problem that we have is the flip side of that, which is sometimes families believe that their family member really needs to be in the hospital, but that person doesn't want to come in the hospital, and then we sometimes have to let them go. So this is always a sensitive and difficult challenge, which is figuring out the right balance between treatment out of the hospital and treatment in the hospital. That's particularly complicated when people are not very motivated to be engaged in treatment. But this is a really important topic, and one that we could discuss, I think, at length, maybe some other time.
Well, hopefully that other time we'll just put it on the agenda. because we're not going to have time today to talk about Dr. Crystal, your work in Germany, your work in China, your work across the globe, and we're certainly not going to have a chance to talk today about your thoughts about the current occupant of the White House and for the last 3 years, that the discussions that have been made about his mental health. I'm not going to put you on the spot there. I realize it's not fair for me to do so, but I gotta say that I'm sure people in your profession have had responses to how the media has portrayed his behavior, and then the various books, etc. And I must say, it has disturbed me that your profession has not been more direct about your opinion. I know if you haven't analyzed him, you can't give a professional opinion, but it just seems to me that there's been so much, words have been so loosely used to describe him, and as a consumer, we're just really not sure who to believe. But I digress. But if you want to respond to that briefly,
I think you summed it up. I think you summed it up.
Well, but I want to then, if you give me permission, because there's mental health, there's social health, there's media health, and then there's just this bombarding of the social media world that we don't know the impact of what it's going to be on the brain. I think you're more aware than I am of the various research of how this has impacted adolescent brain development, infant brain development, everybody's brain development in terms of the media onslaught. So any comments? Do you want to make any
I think that one of the challenges that media is very helpful when it helps people to feel empowered and in control of their lives. And everybody needs information. Getting the right information about COVID was extremely important, and a lot of people got their information about COVID through the media, and that was incredibly important. But we find that it can be overwhelming. Yeah. That particularly when it's stressful, sometimes people are just flooding themselves with frightening, horrible, overwhelming news, and they actually need to take a break and not overwhelm themselves. When they have the information they need to take a break. They need, one of the things that people find is that one of the causes of difficulty sleeping is watching TV or being on your computer right up to the moment that you're trying to go to sleep. If you want to go to sleep, you need to give yourself a chance to cool down. A half hour before you go to sleep, you should turn that TV set off. Or a lot of people should turn that TV set off, or stop, looking at all the bad news on your laptop, and give yourself a chance to relax so that you're not fighting it.
Stay on that point. Are you suggesting that the sleep cycle and its healing mechanism is poisoned and you cannot reboot and regenerate as healthily during that 8 or whatever hour period because of what you've digested just before? I mean, from a neuroscience standpoint, if people need to, I just want you to elaborate on that point about the healthiness of sleep and not being included.
Well, sleep is one of the most important resilience mechanisms that we have. We get up in the morning. If we're fortunate enough to have a good night's sleep, we get up in the morning and we're ready to face what we have to do. We know that there's a lot of things that we can do that can impair the quality of sleep. One of those things is to watch stressful TV or read be on the computer right up until the time you need to give yourself a little bit of a buffer to cool down. Other things that people do that interfere with sleep are to drink caffeinated beverages like tea, coffee, sodas before they go to sleep. Another thing, surprisingly for many people, that impairs the quality of sleep is drinking alcohol before you go to sleep. A lot of times people are drinking alcohol to relax, but then they wake up less rested in the morning because the alcohol has reduced the quality of their sleep. So there's a lot that we can do to help us to get more restful and satisfying sleep. And that helps us to be resilient to stress.
But just one more point in terms of, so the brain is processing that information. It's still, while you're sleeping, the brain is still alive. So you're saying.
Yeah, there are two things. One is that processing that information, thinking about that information before you try to go to sleep can make it hard to relax and go to sleep. And actually, falling asleep for most people isn't something that you just turn off the light and you can fall right asleep. It involves giving yourself time to relax and go to sleep. And for some people, they need to really give themselves and to work on turning off all the messages of the day so that they can go to sleep. Because when you lay down, all those experiences of the day are still with you and oftentimes running through your head. So that's one part of the process. The other thing is that we know that very stressful things stay with us when we're going to sleep. So we might dream about, it might affect the things that we're dreaming about, may wake us up from sleep in the middle of the night. And so, again, giving yourself a little bit of time to relax and to think, to chill out a little bit before you go to sleep is a good idea.
Excellent. We have about 10 minutes or 8 minutes or so, and Harry the station manager for WNHH will play the music. So the music will be our hook. So we'll go until we hear the music, and hopefully our ears, we can hear music. And but any last kind of comments or thoughts for Dr. Crystal that Reverend Perry might have, or Sunday, or Reverend Clayton?
Tom, I would like to know how we deal with children in this period. Like, I mean, even the trauma of going to school, not going to school, the trauma of COVID, their whole lifestyles have changed. Other than home counseling and mentoring, I don't see how we can really reach out to that population.
It's Reverend Perry, that's a really an important point, and I think probably there traditionally, I would say, are two paths. One is you try to support the parents and to provide places where the parents can go for advice about how to help themselves manage as a parent and how to help the child manage the stress of in the fear. The second thing is that there are programs for children who are having particular stress. So I mentioned the Child Study Center at Yale, which has programs for children who are experiencing more severe anxiety and depression. And there are other clinics and programs targeting children who are having a high level of stress. This is a tough time for everybody. And we do, I agree with what you all said about this is a time to pull together. Even if we're social distancing, we can still pull together and support each other, to help everybody get through it.
Dr. John, question, the Child Study Center, for example, do you have to, does it take everyone? Is there a financial obligation in order to get there, or is there a limit, or you have to be super stressed out or diagnosed?
It's a great question. I don't have the exact information for you, but I can absolutely put you in touch with them, and make sure that we share the information appropriately. At Yale, adult psychiatry and child psychiatry are different departments, and we share the teenage years between us.
All right.
Sunday or Clayton, we have about 3.5 more minutes, and just wanted to give you a chance if you had any comments for questions.
Yes. The last question that Dr. Perry asked, my daughter called me this morning and asked me to speak with my 7-year-old granddaughter who is going back to school and give her a blessing to kind of take the edge off and the relieve her of her nervousness. So that's what I was doing this morning with my granddaughter because of the situation that is at hand. Had prayer with her and just had a little fun conversation. And secondly, if I have time, Doctor, if you could just answer this question if possible, talk about the effectiveness and the safetyness of the medication for adults who are dealing with mental health?
Well, so in a general way, we have had medications that treat the problems of thought and the problems of emotion. And the original medications that we had for those both sets of problems, in other words, the antidepressants and what I would call the antipsychotic medications, those were all discovered in the late 1950s. And they've been refined with new versions of them. And the main improvements that we've had for most of these medications over the last 50 years has been to increase the safety and tolerability of the medications. All medications have some side effects. With some of the antipsychotic medications or antidepressant medications, you might put on some weight. Some of them make you feel a little sleepy, things like that. But I believe that doctors and patients need to talk about all the medications whenever a medication is prescribed, so the person who's taking it understands both why they're taking the medication, in other words, what they hope the medication will help, and also to understand what the possible side effects are. That's got to be a part of the discussion anytime a medication is prescribed.
And what are the dangers of stopping the medication without speaking to their physician?
Sure. Well, there are some medications like the Valium-like drugs, which we sometimes call benzodiazepines. If you're on one of those medications, it can be dangerous to stop them abruptly. You can have very serious side effects, including seizures, if you stop those medications suddenly. Most of the other medications do have some withdrawal symptoms if you stop them abruptly. And that's why most medications, instead of stopping abruptly, almost all of the medications that we prescribe on a long-term basis are tapered down. Most of those kinds of symptoms, though, are feeling unsettled or uncomfortable or a headache. They're not so bad, not like the benzodiazepines. But if you stop an antipsychotic medication abruptly or an antidepressant medication abruptly, you're more likely to experience a return of whatever the symptom that was treated by the medication. So people who've had, one of the common problems we see, in fact, is that people take the medications for a long time and then they feel much better. Maybe they've taken the medication for 2 years. Their body is adapted to taking the medication, and then they stop the medication abruptly. And even though they haven't had symptoms for the last 2 years, some of those symptoms might come back when they stop abruptly, because the medications are keeping the symptoms at bay, even if the person's not actually experiencing those symptoms.
Thank you.
Sunday?
Here comes the music, but I'll close with that, communication is key, and that we just need to keep that communication going and open so that folks know that it's safe to talk about the issues that they're having, particularly as COVID continues to keep us locked in. So
Perfect. Everyone, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Dr. Crystal, we got to have you back.
Anytime.
Got to have you back. We know where to reach you. Maybe on November, maybe after the election, we'll have you back to give us your analysis. Everyone, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and talk to you soon. Sunday, thanks. Reverend Clayton, thanks.
Thank you,
Reverend
guys.
Perry, thanks.
Bye-bye.
And Dr. Crystal.